Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me are my dear friends, Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold. If this is the first time that you're here with us watching this podcast-like program, please take a moment to note that these are weekly talks and they're based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. They offer this safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from this psychological lens. So, the idea here is to bring insights and tips and even real world advice to help you and I, all of us, lead a better life. Today, with me are Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold, and we're here to discuss an interesting concept, the concept of renewal, rebirth, refresh, all of that is bringing anew what may be no longer there. As we know, this is interesting for us to think, especially at this time of the year, the beginning of a new year. But before we start our conversation, I just wanted to first and foremost recognize the organizations that are sponsoring our program today. TV, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. And I ask you to please hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you'd like to check out other channels, do so by hitting the spiritist.us website. Also, please put your feedback, your thoughts, your ideas, your questions so that we can address them, if not today, at a later time. But we are here to talk about this concept, as I mentioned, of renewals. And I go through this book that was published, about 20 years ago, where Joanna de Angelis, in collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco, published Jesus in the Gospel in light of depth psychology. And the points about renewals, which is quite dense, in my opinion, on chapter 5, it is, it is there. And I thought we could talk a little bit today together. And remembering that dictionary definition of renewal is to restore anything to a prior state of either freshness or perfection. And if we think about, let's take a moment to imagine us back 2000 years ago at the time of Jesus Christ, and what was humanity going through at the time, and what was needed to be renewed at the time, right? So, Jussara, I'm going to just ask you to take a moment or so to talk about, from a spiritual perspective, what do you think about that time, and maybe even some examples of renewal that we can find, for example, in the Bible, in some of the stories that are brought to us through Jesus.
Oh, hello, Marcia. Hello, Anahy. That's so nice for us to be here again. And talking about renewals, new year, all of that. It always brings things to our minds. And I think that it's quite interesting that intuitively, human beings, every time we go from one year to another, human beings try to reset themselves. And what does it mean for them? When I talk about human beings, of course, I'm talking about myself as well. What
Uh-huh.
means, right, for us to do that? I think that in a way is like we know that it's, in our mind, I can, or we can start again. We can assess what we have done, and in a certain way try to, in this assessment, see what we should not repeat, and what should we continue doing. So it's exactly what a new reincarnation means to us. It is exactly this opportunity of, it's not a new year, but it is a new incarnation, right? And in this chapter, Joanna de Angelis, she starts exactly mentioning, quoting a passage that John writes in this gospel, chapter 3, verse 3, that no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. And we will be commenting more, the whole context about this teachings of Jesus later on. But it's one thing that we understand and that we learn in terms of spiritism in this whole process of getting to know ourselves, of evaluating, what we have done so far and what there is still for us to achieve, and what would be the best pathways for us to go in order to achieve our goals. And in this sense, Joanna de Angelis, when she brings this chapter in the Jesus and the Gospel in the Light of Deep Psychology, she talks about that, of course, in a much profound way. I mean, this is a chapter that we have to read and reread a couple of times at least to really grasp what she's trying to do. But she brings Jesus as being the main character that we should analyze, and that we should, really, like we have in the answer from the Spirit's book, when being Jesus the guide and the model, first showing one thing that is very important yet so very difficult for us to do. He mentions that when he came to earth, times were very difficult. If we think that we are living in difficult times, let us just think about 2,000 years more, at the time of Jesus. We were basically barbarians, right? Of course, like today, we don't think of ourselves like, there is much for us to learn. But when we look back and we look the actions, the reactions, the events that happened during that time, I mean, we had so much to learn. So she starts by pointing out the context in which Jesus was born, being surrounded by a game of personal interest, politics as well, wars and poverty and domination of peoples over others. And then she says, he did not allow any of the shadows that were happening in the surroundings to reach him. And why is that? While she continues in this chapter, she finally clears up that it's not because of just a matter of saying yes or no. It is a matter of understanding that once we reach a certain level of evolvement, and in this case, we are talking about the highest level of evolvement that we know of, nothing of this is going to be contaminate you anymore and be part of your history. But at the same time, she points out that regardless of the spiritual evolvement of Jesus, he was still able to have and to establish a relationship with us, and to come here to teach us, especially about taking advantage of the moment we are living. And this has nothing to do with material things, but really to get to know ourselves and how we are going to be acting upon it. So
I love it. I love it. And one of the things that in this chapter we find Joanna de Angelis calling Jesus as this instructor. She also calls him the supreme psychotherapist. So Anna, yeah, would have to go back to you because there's some concepts such as that of collective shadow that she mentioned, Joanna mentioned, as something that could have corrupted or contaminated, as you mentioned, Jussara, Jesus, but he was exempt, right? He was in that environment, but he was not tainted or corrupted by that very primitive psychosphere, if you can call that. But can you maybe, Anahy, maybe think about or explain here today some of the things that from that psychology perspective, right? Uh, what is the concept of that collective shadow and potentially, and I'm not sure if I'm confusing here, but also perhaps the idea of the collective unconscious as per Carl Gustav Jung, and how we, when we talk about renewals, we need to understand that we it's embedded in us, but we, like Jesus, can rise above it, and instead of being corrupted by it, actually transform it, right? Add a positive component to that collective unconscious. I hope I make
Yes,
sense.
a lot of sense for everyone. So we have to understand that, as Jussara said, 2,000 years ago, we were like barbarians, right?
Uh-huh.
Like spiritually speaking, like children. So, because we were doing bad things to each other and, of course, to ourselves, right? Slavery and domination, like Shusada said, and things like that. But well, we already had, at least where Jesus was born, right? People already had an idea of some unity, of some transcendence, of an only God, that I'm talking now about from the depth psychological point of view, right? So that's why he was able to come, because we as human beings have to have at some point the to live the childhood, let's say, okay? We have to have a notion that we belong to something greater than ourselves, and this was happening by the time Jesus came. The notion of an only God, not lots of God, different gods. Okay, it was happening more or less at the same time because it was the Roman Empire, and they worshipped a lot of different gods from Greek times and all that. That's history. We all know that. But there was and that population where Jesus was born, and in that region, because we know that even in Greece they talked about an unknown God, right? That it was the God, the unity above all others, but especially there, the region that where Jesus was born, and the population and in um, the different races, if we can say, that were in contact with each other. Because I'm talking not politically or historically, but psychologically. So that population, and they were in contact with each other. Those people, let's say, peoples, a lot of different, but they already had the idea of unity, of a totality, of a transcendent being that created everything, and that we were, let's say, psychologically speaking, emanations or part of that totality, children of that totality that we call God. So this is very, very important, Why? Because without this archetype, without this, that it's the God image, not the God, but the way that we can perceive God and the unity that God represents. So without that, it would be impossible for Jesus to teach all the other, this his teachings, because in the bottom of all Jesus teaches was, he talks about love, and God is love because it's creation. Love creates, ultimate love, let's say, creates everything. It's the light with capital L, right? So without this sense of connection, at least in the unconscious, not that it was so conscious for people in that time, but it would have been impossible for Jesus to even, even with the parables, with the stories, and with moral concepts that he was teaching, it would be quite difficult, because then we would like be like embryos, let's say, not children, not even born to this reality, making this analogy, right? So we were already born for that idea, concept of totality in our consciousness, at least, had an idea. And then he could come at that point, okay? But you guys talked about the shadow. So what happens is that it was, let's say, in our mind's consciousness, but not in exactly in our egos. Like, we really developed, right, the idea of a totality, because and that we are children of this totality of God. Because if it were, then what would have happened is that, okay, no slavery anymore. We are all okay. We are all brothers and sisters. Cool. It would be okay then. Okay, Jesus was just coming to say, yeah, you guys are cool, let's go to the next step. But it wasn't like this, because there was lots of slavery, as Jussara said, a lot of wars, people trying to dominate each other, poverty, and all of that. So what happens is that the ego consciousness, okay, is related to, it's trying to adapt to the culture that the person is inside that culture, right? But deep inside, we have a knowledge, because of ourselves, our higher selves, our, the, as Jung said, the greater personality, let's say, that we are, like Joanna says, our spirit, okay? So our spirit was evolved enough to know this reality, that we are part of something much, much bigger than ourselves. So transpersonal knowledge, that we are not only this person. But the ego says, no, but when I'm here, people were there in that culture, so I want to have power, I want to be satisfied. So what happens is that everything that is coming from the unconscious, saying, oops, don't do that, don't go to war, don't treat people badly, pay attention, respect each other. But then the ego say, no, no, this is not right, I don't want to listen to this inner voice. So it kind of protects itself from the knowledge that is coming from inside. Then the shadow is born. So you can imagine that there was, if the consciousness, the collective consciousness of unity was already there, and the concept of God was already there, especially in that region with that collective, the
Mhm.
culture, the Hebrews, and all, different people that were in contact with each other. But
Mhm.
the ego wanted to have power, to, to be like the Roman Empire, have be rich, be this and that. So, of course, there was a lot of shadow because the conflict is always first and utmost within ourselves. That's the kingdom that we have to conquer. So, what happened is that Jesus knew that when he came. And exactly as Jussara is saying that Joanna is telling us in this chapter, he it was not contagious, let's say, the collective shadow, because our own personal shadow is in contact with everybody's shadows and making a collective shadow. But he was able to be here because he knew past, present, and future of each and every one of us. So he knew we were developing. He was not talking to our egos. He was talking to our higher selves. He was, and I love when Jung calls the archetypes
Hmm.
tools of God in the psyche, spiritual principles in the psyche. And the principal archetype, let's say the main archetype, is the imago Dei, the unity, the totality. So Jesus was helping us with all his love, his wisdom of such an evolved and wonderful soul, showing us the path that we should walk, and we have been walking this path for millennia, right? 2,000 years and more. So I would say that you guys made a lot of sense talking about the shadow first of all,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because that's he was, he was not contaminated by the shadow, because he was all integration. As Jussara said so well, if we integrate all the knowledge that little by little we achieve in different lives, then at some point the collective shadow of, of people who are still struggling to deny their own conflicts will not contaminate us anymore. So back to you guys.
Yeah, very good. I just wanted to remind all of us, right, that you mentioned the archetypes, and Jung's major archetype includes that idea of rebirth, right, which is what we're discussing here. But as we're talking about Jesus, as we're talking about 2,000 years ago, roughly, wanted to maybe, Jussara, if you could talk a little bit about the parable, which is one of my very, very favorite, the parable of Good Samaritan. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically it's in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, 29 through 37. But it's basically it's the idea that a man, and we don't know what type of man, right? This is, but he was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and like many of the time, he was robbed, attacked by robbers, and those men, those individuals, robbed him, attacked him, stripped him of everything he owned, and beat him up, and he was left for dead, naked and with nothing else on the road. And a priest and a Levite pass by, and they don't help him at all. In fact, they go away from where he was, and a Samaritan stopped, took care of this man, took him to an inn, and even paid for his care while he was gone and he was going to come back. So there's a lot of touch points and very, very profound teachings that Jesus brought to us in this one short parable. But Jussara, can you talk a little bit about some of the main topics that this parable brings to us, and how does it connect with this knowledge that we're talking here about 2,000 years ago?
Right, Marcia. Well, actually, the study of this parable, it would be a podcast by itself. So we will
Uh-huh.
try to point out some important aspects that we have. And one of them is explaining how Jesus knew his crowd.
Right.
Right. He knew exactly to whom he was talking to, what kind of vocabulary was he going to be using, symbolisms that would touch the people according to their knowledge and then their understanding at the time. And this was a question, what raised it, what brought about Jesus to to give us this parable of the Good Samaritan was because he was inquired by a priest that actually didn't want to know anything. I mean,
Uh-huh.
at that point, he was sure there was nothing he could learn from Jesus. And
Uh-huh.
still, he wanted to trick Jesus. He wanted to have uh, the possibility of saying that he was wrong in this or that. And when he asks about, how someone can enter into the kingdom of heaven, this is where the beauty of, psychologist, psychotherapist Jesus comes about, because he uses the Socratic method. He doesn't reply to the question because he knew that whatever he answered, he would be against. Or, like many times it happens, we live in a very difficult world, like now with
Mhm.
social media, where many of the communication we do by writing, people put their punctuation and the intonation as they please, and not necessarily on how we are saying things or we wish to say things. I can wish you, happy holidays, and then this person is being very cynical with me because she knows that 10 years ago my Christmas was not that good or whatever. People can understand things the way they want according to their mental outlook. So by saying that, he knew that no answer would be satisfactory to him, so he gives him the chance to reply himself what is written in the law. And then Jesus says, exactly what you say, go and do the same. God love
Mhm.
God, and etc., etc., etc. But then he wants more, and then who is my neighbor? Because in the law is saying you have to also to love your neighbor. And then then again Jesus doesn't reply to the question. He comes with the parable of the Good Samaritan and asks him, who do you think was the Good Samaritan of this man?
Mhm.
Was the not the Good Samaritan? Who do you think helped his man?
Yeah.
And it was the Samaritan, because there
Yes.
was the Pharisee, the Levite, etc., that didn't help him. All with a name, to show about love, without any kind of prejudice, without any kind of discrimination. And this as well, because when we put um, reincarnation into the conversation, I mean,
Mhm.
you may be born in as you were today, but you can have, or definitely you had different experiences in different cultures, in different ethnicities in the past. And while Anahy was talking, right, and I was thinking how hard it must be to be a psychotherapist, psychotherapist, and psychiatrist without the understanding of reincarnation. Because, we have to look at the patient as the patient being a tabula rasa, right? The concept of a blank slate, which was the idea that individuals were born empty of any building mental content.
Mhm.
This is what Joanna de Angelis is telling us now, and this is what we learn as well in Spiritism. If we think about that, how would we, in terms of civilization, would be piling up information? I mean, we would always be born, everyone in the same level. So there was no building in. And in
Mhm.
accordance to this chapter, as she says, we have to deal with a lot of things that is stored in the computer of our mind for incarnations and more incarnations. And but we have to understand as well what is the aim that we have for this incarnation. In Kardec, when he asked for the spirits, and the spirit spoke about the aim of incarnation, question 132, the spirits reply, the main aim is to reach perfection, is to learn from the mistakes, is to work all of those concepts, all of the habits, the customs, the archetypes, everything, so that we can finally be part of the unconscious. No, no. What is what do? Sorry, the conscious. How does she say
The
here?
cosmic consciousness.
Cosmic
Yes.
conscious.
Yes,
Yes.
cosmic conscience. Just one remark before I pass back to you. Well, remember that when we are talking about cosmic conscience, there are many people, or there are some people, some philosophical doctrines that they say that when we get to this point, it's like we are going to lose our individuality, that we are part of God, and it's just going to be like a cell in the body of a God, so to say. And
Hmm.
it is not so. When we are talking about cosmic conscience, it means, yes, partaking of all the mysteries of the universe and so on, but it's still maintaining our individuality.
I love it. And I do want to add to that the concept of individuality, individuation in light of the reaching this cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, I remember listening to Jussara when Joanna says that we are heir to ourselves, let's say, to our own journey.
Hmm.
And there would be no point if even to evolution, if we were to make all our personal journeys and achieve this integration of all the wisdom, the experiences that are unique, because each one of us have like the evolution, the common ground is the same, right? We are all brothers and sisters. We are all children of this unity and this giver of life, light, and love that we call God. But we have free will. So, and free will to choose our experiences, to learn with them, to decide which path we want to go in, travel in each reincarnation, right? That Jussara was talking about. So, of course, we are unique in this way. That's why one of the concepts that Jung talks about is individuation. It's not individualization,
Uh-huh.
because it's not to be individual or part of each other, but it's individuation, like, say, the soul is blooming. Came to my mind, right? Jung doesn't say like that,
Uh,
but like this poetic image, that we can be like growing in integrating everything that we learn step by step in this life and in previous life, so that we can integrate and be, like in the spirit's book, from the atom to the archangel, right? I
uh-huh.
don't remember the name, is 500 and what you said of them.
540. That's one that we normally know.
Yeah, 540, that's it. So that someday we can get to the stage that we know of. Its the evolution is, limited, but that we know of as archangel state, let's say. So how it could we could think of as an individuation of the soul, of the spirit, right? When we integrate and we develop consciousness, spiritual
Hmm.
consciousness, our
Hmm.
higher self, our spirit, in such a way that we integrate all of our experience like Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
right? The highest evolved, so that we have been in contact, direct contact with, right? So that's why he's the way. He's showing us the way to
Mm-hmm.
this cosmic consciousness where we partake, as you said, of
Mm-hmm.
love, of
Absolutely. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's
Yeah.
quite interesting, since we are in this point,
Uh-huh.
that to the end of the chapter, Joanna
Uh-huh.
says that spiritist psychology,
Mm-hmm.
supported by laboratory experience. I always think, why is Joanna saying that? Each sentence that, like Jussara said, we have to read many times, because there
Uh-huh.
are, like in the our computers, open some windows and then you go and go, and then you get the, at least as much as we can, her message, the whole message. But yes, as a psychiatrist and doing research myself, yes, the science is coming to this point where it's proving spiritist psychology,
Yeah.
because we have past life experiences. Many people, especially in the United States, I know that do past life therapy, for instance. We have near death experiences that are studied and researched by psychiatrists and neurologists and other medical personnel around the world. And so we have lots of experiences that are showing us that
Mm-hmm.
spiritist psychology, yes, is the path that we haven't, like Jussara said, we are not like Freud thought, tabula rasa, that it's in Latin, right? We are not a blank sheet of paper that we
Mm-hmm.
can just say, oh, nothing is written, and when we are born, then then the experiences begin, and then the ego evolves. Yes, but what about all our heritage? What about the archetypes? What about, all the images, the mythology, religions all over the globe that come with images that have all this content, that it's actually built by human beings, right? And they appear in our day by day lives. And one of the archetypes we are talking about is rebirth,
Yes.
death and
Mm-hmm.
rebirth. It's they are powerful archetypes, because everything, and we are part of nature. Our psyche
Mm-hmm.
is part of nature. Everything in nature is transforming all the time, so it has to die and has to have a rebirth, has to be born again. So I think it's beautiful, as Joanna says that, and she says it takes rebirth, right? Spiritist psychology as a paradigm for upholding divine justice. So we can
Yes.
understand better divine justice and experiential mechanisms for the conquest of the profound self, of our higher self. Isn't it all about, since we are beginning a new year, all about what the information that comes to us through the spiritist knowledge that we are, and through other channels of knowledge in different cultures, that we are evolving globally. Our
Yeah.
planet Earth is evolving to, we are leaving the previous step where we have the suffering, and we are going to a new step in evolution in humankind, to and the planet itself, to a different stage where spirituality will be like, something natural, and then we will finally understand the gospel Not only understand, but practice as well.
Love it. No, I love it. I appreciate that so much. The idea that it's from the various components of this discussion, right? And some of the very specific content, such as reincarnation, but also the archetype, the collective shadow, etc. But the idea that when we put it all together, we'll be able to truly dive deeply into the lessons that like Joanna de Angelis told us, the supreme psychotherapist Jesus brought to us so many years ago. And if you could allow me, I just wanted to share a metaphor that Joanna brings to us in this book, right? And she says, "We're born of the spirit, like the wind, that blows where it wishes, and no one knows where it comes from or where it goes." And I just thought that idea of a wind blowing and nobody stops to ask, but where you came from, where you going? It just is. And we in this great enigma of our destiny, right? The human destiny. It's really important for us to understand that the direction, depending on where it goes because of free will, right, of our us as spirits, as the wind that blows, it's up to us to find the evolutionary journey to get to that integration to the cosmic consciousness. Love it, love the thoughts. And I want to, before we close today, maybe if Jussara, you can give us a little bit more about the idea of renewals from those teachings of Jesus that you may want to share with the audience today.
Okay. Just one thing first, because I'm
Mhm.
not going to resist saying that. Next time any of you is in therapy, don't blame your mother, okay? It's so easy to just blame on the mother, right?
That- that's a default, right?
Fault or your frustrations and everything that is, may seem wrong with you. Joanna de Angelis makes it very clear here that it's everything that we bring with us. And like it says here, every effect that has a cause. In whatever
Yes.
we are sowing today, this is what we are going to be harvesting. You know, and in the future, it can be a very near future or it can be another incarnation. So let us think about it now. But I think in the times of Jesus, right, there is a very important conversation that he held with one very, prominent Pharisee that was Nicodemus. And he was a doctor of the law, which means, and he was there in the Sanhedrin and had all the respect, right? And he comes to Jesus trying to understand uh, how it is to be born again. Because when Jesus tells him the necessity of being born again, he doesn't understand. Although at that time they had the concept of resuscitation, he could
Mhm.
not understand, the depth of what Jesus was trying to tell him. One thing that Joanna de Angelis comments here about the personality of Nicodemus is that he was kind of vain, but in a way, although he was a very knowledgeable man, he something deep inside told him that he had to hear Jesus, respect Jesus, but he was not ready for the work.
Mhm.
And this is what is hard for all of us, because many times in this process of renewal, right, we know what is not right with us. But between knowing and doing, it's kind of hard. And this is
Mhm.
the thing that he was listening to Jesus eagerly, but he was still not willing to do what he had to do, right, and had to be done. And so it's when Jesus explains or asks him, "You are a doctor of the law, and you still do not know of those things."
Uh-huh.
Right. When he explains about, being born of the spirit and being born of the flesh, and when Joanna de Angelis explains about, the wind and everything. So he was showing that rebirth is the key to understanding reality, is the key to understanding the human destiny and everything that happens after. So, unfortunately, at that time, Nicodemus was very sympathetic to Jesus, but he still could not follow him. I'm sure he's on the right
But
path.
but can we, Jussara, tell us here, can we,
Yeah.
as we hear this discussion here of rebirth, renewal, are we ready? What do we need to do to be ready for this very, very powerful message?
All years lived and just go, right? This is what Joanna de Angelis was talking about Nicodemus here. We do not want to be like Nicodemus. He was before Jesus. Jesus was having a private conversation with him, explaining things to him, and still.
Unable to, yeah,
And
yeah,
I think it's we cannot imagine that we are going to be able to do everything that has to be done in just one incarnation. That's why God is good, God is merciful, and there are so many. But we have to understand that we have to start somehow. And this is, no judgment,
mhm,
no judging you, just thinking, what is my goal? What do I have to do? And just follow, this purpose, this aim. What is the aim of my reincarnation? It
yeah,
is for me to be better. And
yes,
sometimes it means to drink a very, 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 very bitter
yes,
medicine,
yes,
but it
yeah,
still is for your own good. There is nothing that comes out of our way that is, it doesn't have an aim to improve us, to make us more and more spiritually evolved. But of course, we complicate things
we
because
do, we
this
do. We meddle, right? We meddle into this bitter medicine, and often we are also corrupted by the environment that we're immersed in. So, as we have just a few minutes left, Anahy, do you want to give us a message of rebirth and renewal for all of us? What do we need to put in our hearts to be able to be better able to accept the message that Jesus brought to us 2 millennia ago?
Yes, I think it's all about exactly as Jussara said, that Joanna is, showing us with this wonderful book and her writings through Divaldo, that we must know ourselves better as much as we can, because this is the path, because the kingdom is inside of each one of us, and
Mhm.
that's the kingdom that we have to conquer. And just to say goodbye, I'll leave you with a wonderful sentence by Eric Newman. He
Uh-huh.
was a very known Jungian psychologist, and he wrote a wonderful book, History of the Origin of Consciousness. And he says the relationship between the ego and the unconscious, and between the personal and the transpersonal, right,
Mhm.
decides the destiny of the individual as well as that of humanity. The stage for this encounter is the human mind. Isn't that beautiful? So
That's
it's
awesome.
everything that Jussara has just said, but putting in the psychological terms. So let's be psychotherapists of ourselves.
Yeah,
Learn that psychotherapists come from psych, that it's the psych, our psych, and therapists from the Greek, it has a Greek origin, is to take care, let's say, to serve. So let's take care of our psyches, of our souls, to do the best we can and to renew ourselves every day if we can.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you both. I hope all of us who are here today listening to this conversation can take this advice, and let's be therapists to ourselves, to our souls, to our vulnerable inner child that we often find ourselves as the hurt one. But with that, I'll see you next week as we continue our discussions. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.